Have you ever stood on a piece of land, just felt the solid ground beneath your feet and wondered if it was actually real?
It's actually a pretty unsettling thought when you really stop to consider it. I mean, we generally assume geography is just a fixed canvas, right?
Right. You look at a map, you see where the blue meets the green, and you just trust that the coastline is a fact of nature.
Exactly. But the truth is, in a lot of major coastal cities, that ground is a total fabrication. And today, we're taking a deep dive into this fascinating historical topography report on Osaka's Bay Area.
Yet we are zeroing in on a couple of incredibly revealing spots specifically, which are Tenpozan and Yumeshima. And for those of you listening, we aren't just giving you a lesson in natural geology here.
No, definitely not. We are looking at this 200-year epic battle between human willpower and a highly dynamic, constantly shifting ocean. And it is really a battle of brute force.
It really is. This is the story of how a major economic hub literally built its way out of successive crises. And they didn't do it with pristine bedrock. They used dredged mud,
Yeah.
millions of tons of municipal trash, and some of the most extreme engineering on the planet.
Yeah, and we are going to trace this relentless, almost obsessive seaward expansion. Along the way, we're going to highlight some amazing hidden gem tourist spots connected to this history that you can actually go visit right now.
And ultimately, we want to look at all this artificial land and figure out what it actually means for the multi-billion-dollar future cities we are currently building out into the water. So let's just jump right in.
Right, so to really understand this, we have to go back to the literal starting line of Osaka's expansion. The year is 1831, and the city was facing what was essentially an economy-destroying waste management problem.
Let's set the scene for you all. In the 1830s, Osaka's entire economic lifeblood was its water network, specifically the Aji River. But they had this crippling issue with silt.
Yeah, millions of cubic meters of mud had just washed down from upstream and completely choked the river mouth. The massive wooden cargo ships of that era, the Kidimabune, they simply couldn't get into the city center anymore.
They were literally just hitting the bottom.
Hmm.
And, I mean, if the ships can't enter, the merchants can't trade, and the city suffocates.
Right, precisely. The Edo shogunate realizes they are facing a total economic bottleneck. So they order this unprecedented dredging project. They mobilize thousands of laborers every single day.
Which is wild to think about. We're talking about an army of people with hand tools and baskets, just engaging in an absolute marathon of mud shoveling to clear that river.
It really was. The logistics of just moving that much wet earth by hand is staggering. But the really brilliant part is what they actually did with it.
Yeah, because the standard municipal playbook would be to, load all that dredged river sludge onto barges, haul it miles out into the deep ocean, and just dump it. Out of sight, out of mind.
But the citizens of Osaka did something totally different. They piled it all up right on the north bank of the river mouth. They turned this incredibly grueling municipal chore into a massive community event.
Wow, really?
Yeah, local neighborhoods actually donated money to fund the workers. People genuinely felt a sense of pride going out there and hauling mud.
It sounds like the shogunate essentially tricked the citizens into doing municipal labor by disguising it as a giant patriotic block party.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like a 19th century civic Kickstarter campaign. They just rebranded the disposal of millions of tons of river sludge into the creation of an elite public park.
And that alignment of interests is exactly what makes it so successful. The shogunate gets their vital economic waterway cleared, stabilizing the flow of goods, but the citizen class, they suddenly gained a profound sense of ownership over the city's geography.
They didn't just build a dump, did they?
No, they planted pine trees and cherry blossoms all over it. It became this highly visible, beautiful navigation mark for ships entering the bay, which they initially called Mejirushiyama, or Landmark Mountain.
And eventually, they named the whole area Tenpozan after the Tenpo era it was built in. Which actually brings us to our first hidden tourist gem.
Right.
Today, if you visit the Bay Area, Tenpozan is famously known as Japan's lowest mountain. You can go to the local park there and actually receive a mountain climbing certificate for conquering it.
Though, obtaining that certificate today is a very different physical experience than it would have been in the 1830s.
How so?
Well, when they first piled up that mud, the artificial mountain stood about 20 meters high. It was a genuinely impressive, imposing sight on the flat coastline. But if you look at the measurements today, it clocks in at a mere 4.53 meters.
Wait, the mountain just vanished. I mean, I know part of that is natural sinking, which, spoiler alert for you listening, is going to be a massive recurring theme for this entire deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. The land is always trying to return to the sea.
But a huge chunk of that elevation loss wasn't nature, was it? It was intentional. That beautiful park wasn't allowed to stay a park for very long.
Right, the outside world intervened. By 1854, the geopolitical climate drastically shifted. The black ships, these heavily armed foreign warships, started appearing in Japanese waters.
And that posed a direct threat to the Kansai economic hub.
Exactly. The shogunate realized their centuries-old policy of isolation was effectively dead, and they were completely exposed. They needed modern coastal defenses, and they needed them immediately.
So by 1864, the military looks around the bay, spots their beautiful, crowd-funded Cherry Blossom Mountain, and says, yep, we're taking that. It's a fort now.
Under the guidance of naval magistrate Katsukaishu, they completely militarized the space. They physically shaved down the height of Tenpozan and transformed it into a Western-style star-shaped fortress.
Similar to the famous Goyokaku in Hakodate, for those of you familiar with Japanese history, the civic park was totally replaced by military deterrence.
And the absolute crown jewel of this new fortress was a massive bronze cannon. Just to give you a visual on the scale here, this thing was 352 centimeters long. That's over 11 feet.
And it weighed 2.4 tons. That is roughly the weight of a full-grown rhinoceros, cast entirely in bronze by a master craftsman named Kudara Sajiro.
It was this terrifying cutting-edge weapon meant to guard the river mouth. But here is the wild twist. Almost immediately after the Meiji Restoration, just a few years later, it became completely obsolete.
Absolutely.
Yeah. By 1870, they moved this massive cannon to Osaka Castle and repurposed it into a public clock. They nicknamed it the Hiru no Dan, which translates to the noonbang.
It is just a phenomenal image, taking the ultimate weapon of coastal defense and using it to tell people when to eat lunch.
Right.
Hold on, let me get this straight. You're telling me they pour their hearts, their treasury, and their absolute best metallurgy into casting a 2.4-ton bronze cannon, and less than 10 years later, it's a time bell.
That's exactly what happened.
Was the Star Fortress just a PR stunt by the shogunate to look tough? Or did military technology really make a 2.5-ton piece of artillery useless overnight?
It is really a potent mix of both. I mean, the fort certainly served a theatrical purpose. The shogunate desperately needed to project strength to both the foreigners and their own restless population.
Right, that makes sense.
But militarily, yes, the technology was moving at blinding speed. The world was rapidly shifting from smoothbore bronze cannons firing solid iron balls to rifled steel artillery mounted on steam-powered ironclad warships.
Oh, wow. So against those new vessels, a static bronze cannon on a mud hill offered zero actual deterrence.
Zero. But you know, the real profound takeaway here isn't the failure of the cannon, it's the success of the noon bang.
What do you mean, like the shift to telling time?
Yeah, the enforcement of standard time. Think about what a modernizing industrial society requires. In a feudal society, you work when the sun is up, time is fluid.
Sure, you just go by the daylight.
But in an industrializing economy, you have factories. You need 500 workers to show up and start the looms at the exact same minute. You need trains to run on tight schedules.
So you need a rigidly synchronized workforce.
Exactly. By firing that cannon every day at noon, the new government was taking the leftover obsolete scraps of feudal military defense and weaponizing them to enforce the new, rigid rhythm of the modern industrial citizen.
That is an incredible way to look at it. The weapon wasn't pointed at the ocean anymore. It was pointed at the daily lives of the workforce.
It really was.
And for you listening, here is your second hidden gem. You can actually see this exact bronze cannon today. It is sitting right by the entrance of the Osaka Castle Museum.
You can walk right up and touch this 2.4-ton piece of industrializing history. But if you go back to Tenpozan, you won't find the fort.
No, only a tiny pedestal monument remains. The landscape basically erased its own history to make way for the next phase.
Because standard time wasn't the only thing modernization brought. It brought global trade. The year is 1868, Osaka officially opens to the world, and suddenly that Oji River proves to be the city's Achilles heel.
Yeah, the Meiji government was desperate to prove they were a serious player on the international stage, so they set up a designated foreign settlement at Kawaguchi, right at the junction of the Aji and Kizu rivers.
They laid out 26 blocks of land and auctioned them off to countries like the UK, the US, France, and Prussia. The master plan was to build a little Europe.
Right. They envisioned bustling consulates, modern brick infrastructure, gas lamps, paved roads. They wanted this cosmopolitan hub of global commerce.
But they overlooked one fatal flaw in the geography. The water was just too shallow.
Which is a huge problem.
Massive. We mentioned earlier that global shipping was evolving. We're moving away from wooden sailboats to massive steel steamships. And a steel ship carries infinitely more cargo, but it is incredibly heavy.
It sits deep in the water. It has a deep draft.
Exactly. So to these new global behemoths, the mouth of the Aji River was essentially a puddle.
It's like a city spending billions to build the ultimate high-tech business district to attract the world's best tech companies, but realizing after everyone moves in that you only install dial-up internet.
That is the perfect analogy. The hardware of the global economy had upgraded to deep draft steel steamships, and Osaka's harbor was completely stuck on legacy software.
And the logistics of trying to work around that legacy software were an absolute nightmare. Because the big steamships couldn't get close to the Kawaguchi settlement, they had to drop anchor miles out in the deep water of the bay.
Right, and then all the imported goods had to be unloaded by crane onto smaller, shallow draft boats, a process called lightering. And those small boats were then rowed all the way up the river to the settlement.
So you're paying to load the ship, paying to unload it onto a tiny boat, and paying guys to row it up a river. The logistics costs must have absolutely skyrocketed.
They did, and foreign merchants, being ruthless capitalists, weren't going to absorb those costs out of a sense of loyalty to Osaka's urban planning.
Obviously not. They took one look at the situation, looked further down the coast at the natural deep water port of Kobe, packed up their businesses, and just left.
It is a stark lesson in logistics determinism. In the brutal era of 19th century globalization, your political ambition and your beautiful street grids didn't matter at all if your water wasn't deep enough.
Geography dictated economics, and Kawaguchi lost. But, the physical space of Kawaguchi didn't just evaporate. It underwent this bizarre, fascinating pivot.
It really did. Because the wealthy merchants abandoned the area, the land values crashed. And who moves in when real estate gets cheap?
Missionaries and teachers.
Exactly. The area morphed from a failed commercial hub into a center for religion and Western education. It's a striking transformation. The physical remnants of a failed globalization master plan became spiritual centers.
Which brings us to our third tourist gem. If you walk through Kawaguchi today, the chaotic commercial buzz of the 1800s is long gone, but sitting right in the middle of these perfectly gridded, quiet streets is the Kawaguchi Christ Church.
It is this stunning, imposing, red brick, Gothic building. It feels completely out of place, but it is a direct physical echo of that shallow water.
It's amazing how that works out.
Yeah, and the failure at Kawaguchi taught Osaka's leaders a really painful lesson. Inland rivers were dead for modern shipping. If they wanted to remain a global economic power, they had to go out into the deep water.
They had to aggressively build entirely new land further out in the bay, which brings us into the 20th century. And this time, they weren't building islands out of river mud.
No, they were building them out of a much darker byproduct of a modernizing city. Municipal garbage.
And let me tell you, this is where the ambition of the city goes entirely off the rails.
By the 1970s, Osaka's booming population and industry were producing mountains of solid waste. Running out of inland space, they started filling in the outer bay, creating a massive artificial island called Yumeshima.
And initially, its purpose was incredibly humble. It was literally just a dump.
But then, the 1980s Japanese bubble economy hits. Money is practically falling from the sky. Credit is endless. And economic reality becomes entirely optional.
Suddenly, city planners look at this active garbage dump and see a utopian vision. They brand it Technoport Osaka.
The blueprints were incredibly ambitious. They envisioned a futuristic, high-tech residential and commercial city housing tens of thousands of people built right on top of the landfill.
But to justify the astronomical infrastructure costs of turning a dump into a smart city, they needed a catalyst. So they tied the fate of this entire massive island to a single, highly precarious event.
A bid for the 2008 Summer Olympics. Yumeshima was slated to be the Olympic Village and the main stadium complex.
Now, I have to stop and ask the obvious question here. How does a society convince itself to bet an estimated 340 billion yen on winning an international popularity contest, with the backup plan being a literal pile of trash?
You are pointing directly at the core pathology of what researchers call the construction state, or dokenkaka in Japan.
Dokenkaka.
Yeah. During the bubble era, and even persisting after it burst, there was a deeply entrenched belief among planners that pouring concrete literally creates economic reality.
How does that work?
Well, the traditional logic is, let's build infrastructure to meet market demand. The Doken-Koka logic reverses it. It says, if we build a spectacular mega event, we will forcefully inflate the land value and the market will magically appear to justify it.
So they were trying to outbuild reality, and, well, reality won. In 2001, the International Olympic Committee held their vote. Osaka didn't just lose, they were completely crushed.
Out of the entire committee, they secured exactly 6 votes.
6 votes, that's dead last.
Dead last. The illusion shattered instantly. The broader economic bubble had already burst, the Olympic catalyst was dead, and the city was left holding an island that cost roughly 340 billion yen to build.
And it just sat there, completely empty. For over 2 decades, it was overgrown with weeds, universally mocked in the press as a negative legacy, the ultimate symbol of a toxic, stranded asset.
To really grasp the sheer scale of a 340 billion yen weed patch, you need to visit our 4th hidden gem. Head over to the nearby Cosmo Tower Observatory.
From way up on the observation deck, you get a bird's-eye view of the massive expanse of Yumeshima. Though, if you look down there today, you aren't going to see weeds anymore.
No, you are going to see a frantic, monumental construction site, because the city is currently attempting an unprecedented campaign of image washing.
Right. They managed to secure the 2025 World Expo, and Yumeshima is the primary site. They are currently building the massive wooden grand ring structure right on top of that old landfill.
One of the largest wooden structures in the world, actually.
But let's talk about the ground that ring is sitting on. It's not exactly stable bedrock, is it?
Not at all. Because Yumeshima was built on decades of varied municipal trash and extremely young, soft clay dredged from the bay, the land is still undergoing active consolidation.
Meaning it's physically sinking.
Exactly. Furthermore, because it's a former landfill, engineers have to constantly monitor and manage the risk of methane gas venting from the decomposing garbage deep beneath the surface.
Wow. It is an incredibly precarious, highly engineered foundation for a global showcase.
Yeah.
Which actually sets up our final incredible piece of engineering.
Yes, it does.
Because if you have a stranded, sinking island venting methane, and you just bet the city's reputation on hosting millions of people there for an expo, you have to find a way to get those people there.
You have to connect the island to the mainland, and you can't just throw a simple bridge over this section of the port. It required a subterranean engineering feat that frankly borders on science fiction.
The Yuvasaki Tunnel.
Right. In the early 2000s, when they first set out to connect Yumeshima, they faced a massive problem. The seafloor under the bay isn't solid rock that you can easily bore a tunnel through.
It's ultra-soft, highly saturated clay. It basically has the structural integrity of pudding.
To solve this, engineers utilized the immersed tube method. Instead of digging a tunnel through the mud, they built the tunnel in segments on dry land. They prefabricated 8 massive hollow concrete tubes.
And the scale of these tubes is just hard to wrap your head around. Each one is 100 meters long, 35 meters wide, and over 8 meters high.
Imagine taking a 30-story skyscraper, laying it completely flat on its side, and doing that 8 separate times.
They took these giant concrete monoliths, towed them out into the active waters of the bay, and sank them into a dredged trench in the mud.
And then they had to perfectly connect them together in the pitch-black depths of the ocean.
Which seems impossible. How did they do that?
They achieved this using something called the key element method. When they bring 2 of these massive tubes together underwater, they use thick rubber gaskets between them. Then they pump the seawater out of the small gap between the bulkheads.
By removing that water, they create a vacuum.
Right. Exactly. The crushing immense pressure of the surrounding ocean physically shoves the 2 massive concrete tubes together, compressing the rubber and creating a perfect watertight seal without needing to pour concrete underwater.
I am just reeling at the physics of that. I mean, trying to dock 2 spaceships together is a miracle of engineering. But doing it totally blind, hundreds of feet underwater, utilizing the crushing weight of the ocean to do the heavy lifting.
All while resting on a mattress made of wet clay.
Right. That is just staggering.
It is a total marvel. And the tubes themselves feature a brilliant multi-layer design. The top layer handles the vehicle and train traffic, but the bottom layer is a dedicated drainage and structural support system.
Because they have to fight the continuous sinking of the soft ground, right?
Yes.
And flex to withstand earthquakes.
Exactly.
And here is the best part, your final tourist gem for you listening. As of January 19, 2025, the Chua subway line extension officially opened to the public.
You can literally walk up to a ticket machine, get on a train, and ride right through this submerged, highly engineered marvel all the way out to the expo site on Yumeshima.
But when you were sitting on that train, gliding under the ocean, there's a crucial perspective we want you to keep in mind.
Yes. While we absolutely should marvel at the key element technique and the sheer audacity of the concrete tubes, we have to recognize the economic reality driving it, the concept of path dependency.
Right. The primary reason this multi-billion yen underwater marvel exists is the sunk cost fallacy.
The city simply couldn't afford to abandon the 340 billion yen they had already wasted on the empty island. To save the sunk costs, they had to sink billions more into a tunnel to reach it.
It's an endless, incredibly expensive treadmill. You build the land fails. You build a tunnel to save the land sinks.
Precisely. And more importantly, we must ground all this high-tech discussion in the human reality. This entire Bay Area, stretching from the 1830s to the 2025 Expo, is fundamentally built on physical labor.
From the thousands of Edo period citizens breaking their backs, shoveling river mud by hand to build Tenpozan, to the highly specialized deep-sea divers risking their lives to lock those massive tunnel sections together in the dark.
If you really want to connect with that human element, seek out the memorial monument located in Bentensho in the Minato Ward.
It specifically honors the laborers, the engineers, and the war victims whose sweat and sometimes their lives literally built the ground this entire port stands on.
It's a deeply sobering reminder that urban infrastructure isn't just concrete and blueprints, it is human grit.
It's an essential perspective, because when we step back and synthesize these 5 eras, from mud piles to smart islands, a very clear pattern emerges in the historical topography.
We are witnessing a profound paradigm shift in what a city believes its edges are actually for.
If you look at the 19th century, the Tenpozan dredging, the Kawaguchi merchant settlement, the Star Fortress with its massive cannon, these were intensely practical, survival-driven spaces.
They were spaces of production and defense. They were fixing waterways to ensure the city didn't starve, building forts to shoot at foreign invaders, and laying out grids to facilitate global shipping.
But look at the trajectory of those spaces. The military fort becomes a public park. The failed commercial hub becomes a quiet neighborhood of churches and schools.
And as we arrive in the late 20th and 21st centuries with Yumeshima, the city isn't building artificial land to host factories or shipyards anymore. It is building land entirely for consumption and experience.
The World Expo, the proposed integrated casino resorts. The fundamental value of the artificial land is no longer about what it can physically produce, but the global spectacle it can provide.
But there is a massive looming catch to that spectacle, isn't there? The absolute fragility of the foundation it's all sitting on.
Definitely. The defining characteristic of this entire coastline is its artificiality. Every single inch of this land is fake.
Humans willed it into existence through sheer force, and nature is constantly, relentlessly trying to reclaim it. We saw Tenpozan shrink from 20 meters down to 4. Yumeshima is still actively settling.
The clay is compacting, and engineers are fighting methane leaks. The city has essentially locked itself into an eternal, multi-billion-dollar maintenance contract with the ocean.
So what does this all mean for us today?
Well, if you think about it, visiting this Bay Area, riding that new subway out to the expo site, it isn't just about looking at interesting architecture or visiting a pavilion.
No, it is about physically standing on top of an ongoing 200-year-old argument between humanity and the water.
That is the perfect distillation of it. These edges, these artificial marginal lands, serves the ultimate urban testing grounds.
Because they exist on the literal fringe of the city, geographically separated from the established historic centers, authorities feel emboldened to use them for their most radical political, economic, and technological experiments.
It is an endless cycle of creation and amnesia. You create the land to solve an immediate crisis. You eventually forget the messy, complicated past, the choked rivers, the rotting garbage, the failed merchant hubs, and you endlessly reinvent its future.
It is a landscape that fundamentally asks us to question the permanence of the ground beneath our feet.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the resilient, sinking, and constantly shifting artificial shores of Osaka.
It's been a fascinating journey.
And on that note, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If Osaka's 2-century history proves that every permanent artificial landscape eventually sinks, shifts, or becomes totally economically obsolete, well, what does that mean for the multi-billion-dollar artificial islands and coastal megacities we are currently building around the world right now?
It's a great question.
When our current cutting-edge smart cities and giant expo rings are dug up by historians in 200 years, will they be viewed as an engineering triumph of the 21st century? Or just another decorative time bell waiting to be repurposed?